Have you ever wondered what lies behind the perfect masks people wear? In the opulent world of the 19th century aristocracy, a single moment can shatter a reputation or reveal a truth hidden for years. For one woman hiding her poverty and sorrow behind a simple satin mask, a masquerade ball was a desperate gamble. For the most powerful and unfeeling man in the room, the Duke of Blackwood, it was just another night of tedious social obligation. But neither could have predicted the moment her mask would fall, and a single silent tear would expose a conspiracy that threatened to unravel them both. The scent of beeswax and wilting roses clung to the air in the cramped London townhouse, a ghost of the grandeur the Vance family had once known. From her position by the single clean window in her small bedchamber, Lady Eleanor Vance could hear the distant rumble of carriages on the grander avenues, each one a painful reminder of the world she had lost, the world she was about to re-enter, albeit as an impostor. Her father, Sir Reginald Vance, had been a man of impeccable reputation and disastrously poor judgment. He had trusted the wrong people, invested in ventures that were nothing more than smoke and mirrors, and when the smoke cleared, his fortune was gone. His spirit, it seemed, had followed soon after leaving Eleanor and her ailing mother, with a mountain of debt and a name that was now whispered with pity rather than respect. They had sold everything of value, piece by painful piece, until only memories and this crumbling house remained. Tonight was the annual Harrington Masquerade Ball, the pinnacle of the social season. A year ago, Eleanor would have been preparing in a flurry of silks and jewels attended by maids. Tonight she stood in a simple slip, her hands trembling as she looked at the gown laid out on her bed. It was alone, a quiet act of charity from Mrs. Gable, her former governess, who now served a more prosperous family. The gown was beautiful, a deep sapphire silk that shimmered like a starless midnight sky, but to Eleanor it felt like a costume woven from deceit. The mask resting beside it, a simple confection of black satin and silver filigree, was her shield and her prison. "Are you ready, my dear?" Her mother's voice, thin and reedy, drifted from the doorway. Mrs. Vance was a fragile woman, her health broken by their fall from grace. Seeing her daughter attend a ball even under these circumstances brought a faint, hopeful light to her tired eyes. Almost, Mother Eleanor said, forcing a brightness into her tone she was far from feeling. She turned, helping her mother to a chair. "Does it look convincing? You look like a queen, Eleanor." Her mother's fingers, frail and translucent, traced the silver embroidery on the sleeve. No one would ever guess. No one could guess. That was the point. Eleanor wasn't attending the Harrington Ball for pleasure. She wasn't seeking a husband or a moment of frivolous joy. She was on a mission born of desperation. The architect of her family's ruin, the man who had charmed his way into her father's trust before gutting his finances, was a man named Lord Geoffrey Davies. He was known for his charisma and his ruthlessness, and Eleanor had learned through hushed back-alley inquiries that he would be at the ball tonight. She had no concrete plan, only a desperate hope that she might overhear something, find some small piece of leverage, some evidence of his treachery that the law had been unable to uncover. He had destroyed her family with paper and ink, with forged signatures and phantom companies. She intended to find the proof. The most formidable obstacle of the evening, however, was not Lord Davies. It was the host's most esteemed guest, Arthur Blackwood, the Duke of Blackwood. His name was a legend in London, spoken with a mixture of awe and fear. He was impossibly wealthy, ruthlessly intelligent, and famously cold. Stories circulated about him in drawing rooms and smoking clubs, how he had single-handedly resurrected his family's flagging fortune after his own father's mysterious financial collapse years ago. How he could ruin a man with a single word on the trading floor. How he had never been seen to smile, not even once. They called him the Winter Duke, a man whose heart was as frozen as his piercing grey eyes. To be noticed by such a man would be disastrous. He moved in circles of such immense power that he would surely recognize her as an outsider, a fraud. His scrutiny was a weapon, and she was utterly defenseless against it. Her plan was simple. Stay in the shadows, observe Lord Davies, and escape before the unmasking at midnight. It was a fool's errand, a long shot, but it was the only one she had. Remember Eleanor? Her mother whispered, her grip tightening on her daughter's hand. You carry the Vance name. No matter what we have lost, you have your pride. Do not let them take that from you. Eleanor nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Tonight she was not Lady Eleanor Vance, the daughter of a disgraced baronet. She was a mystery, a shadow in a sapphire gown. She secured the satin mask over her face, the cool fabric a stark contrast to her heated skin. The mask hid her identity, but it couldn't hide the fear in her heart. As she descended the rickety stairs and stepped into the hired carriage, a shabby affair she prayed no one would notice, she felt as though she were riding towards her own execution. The grand ballroom of Harrington House awaited a gilded cage full of predators, and she was walking into it, willingly, armed with nothing but a borrowed dress and a desperate, fragile hope. Harrington House was a blazing jewel set against the dark canvas of the London night. Light poured from its towering windows, illuminating a line of gleaming carriages that stretched down the entire length of Grosvenor Square. The air hummed with the murmur of aristocratic voices and the soft strains of a string quartet. As Eleanor stepped out of her modest transport, a block away, and approached on foot, the sheer scale of the opulence struck her like a physical blow. This was the world she had been born into, and its loss had never felt so acute. Inside the ballroom was a breathtaking spectacle of crystal and gold. Chandeliers dripped with light, casting a warm, flattering glow on the swirling mass of guests. Ladies in gowns of every conceivable color glided across the polished marble floor, their jewels flashing like captured stars. The men, uniformly elegant in their black evening wear, were a stark counterpoint to the vibrant display. Everyone was masked, adding a layer of intrigue and temporary equality to the rigid social hierarchy. For a few hours a countess could be mistaken for a merchant's wife, and a lady for a nobody. Eleanor kept to the perimeter, her gloved fingers clutching a small reticule. Her heart hammered against her ribs a frantic drumbeat beneath the poised waltz music. She scanned the crowd, her eyes searching for the one face she dreaded and needed to find. Lord Davies. But instead, her gaze was snagged by a figure standing near the grand fireplace, a man who seemed to command the room simply by his stillness. He was taller than the men around him, with shoulders that spoke of strength beneath the perfect cut of his tailcoat. His mask was simple, unadorned black leather, but it did little to soften the harsh, aristocratic lines of his jaw or the severe set of his mouth. Even from across the room, she could feel the aura of cold authority that radiated from him. It could be no one else, Arthur Blackwood, the Duke of Blackwood. He wasn't engaging in the light-hearted banter around him. He was observing his gaze, sweeping over the crowd with a detached analytical intensity, as if he were cataloguing their weaknesses. Eleanor quickly looked away, her cheeks flushing. She felt as though his gaze had physically touched her, a cold spark in the overheated room. She retreated further into the shadows of a large potted palm, trying to make herself invisible. It was from this vantage point that she finally saw him, Lord Geoffrey Davies, holding court near the champagne fountain. He was handsome in a predatory way, his smile too wide, his eyes too sharp. He was laughing a rich, booming sound that made Eleanor's blood run cold. He was surrounded by admirers, hanging on his every word as he recounted some witty anecdote. He looked utterly untroubled, a man without a single care in the world while her family starved. A wave of pure, unadulterated hatred washed over her. She was so focused on Davies that she didn't notice the presence beside her until a low voice, smooth and cold as polished granite, spoke. Hiding from the frivolity, or from someone in particular, Eleanor jumped her head, snapping around. The Duke of Blackwood was standing right there, less than 2 feet away. He had moved with a startling silence. Up close, his presence was even more intimidating. Through the eye holes of his mask, she could see his eyes. They were the color of a winter storm, grey and piercing and utterly devoid of warmth. "Your Grace," she stammered, dropping into a small curtsy, her mind racing. He had seen her staring. He thought she was a common admirer. "You know who I am, but I do not have the pleasure of knowing you," he stated. It wasn't a question. It was a demand for information. "That is the point of a masquerade. Is it not?" She replied, finding a sliver of her old fire. If she was going to be discovered, she would not be discovered cowering. A flicker of something surprise interest passed through his cold eyes. Most ladies at this event are doing everything in their power to be recognized, not to fade into the foliage. "Then perhaps I am not like most ladies," she said, her voice steadier now. His lips quirked in a minute almost imperceptible motion that could not be called a smile. "Evidently." He took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "The orchestra is playing a waltz. It would be a shame to let it go to waste. You will dance with me." It was not a request. It was a command. Refusing the Duke of Blackwood on the floor of the Harrington ballroom was social suicide. But dancing with him, being the center of his, and therefore everyone's attention, was the last thing she wanted. Yet she had no choice. "As you wish, Your Grace," she said, her voice a cool murmur. He led her onto the dance floor. The moment his gloved hand touched hers, and his other arm settled firmly on her waist, a jolt went through her. It wasn't a pleasant thrill. It was the shocking sensation of touching something intensely cold, yet charged with a dangerous energy. The crowd parted for them, whispers erupting like wildfire. The mysterious woman in sapphire had captured the attention of the Winter Duke. As they moved to the elegant rhythm of the waltz, he guided her with an expert, impersonal precision. He was a perfect dancer, but there was no joy in it, only flawless execution. "You seem displeased, madam," he observed, his voice, a low rumble meant only for her. "Most women would consider my attention a prize." "I am not here for prizes, Your Grace," she retorted, her chin held high. "And I find it hard to believe your attention is given without a purpose." "My purpose," he said, his grip tightening ever so slightly, "is to understand why a woman who is clearly a lady of quality is pretending to be a wallflower. My reasons are my own. Secrets rarely stay secret for long in this city." He countered, his voice like silk-wrapped steel. They danced in a tense silence for a few more moments, a bubble of cold intensity in the midst of the ballroom's warmth. Eleanor was acutely aware of his proximity, the clean, sharp scent of his cologne, the sheer power held in his controlled movements. He was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, and right now he seemed to want answers from her. She could also feel other eyes on them. Lord Davies was watching, a curious frown on his face, and Lady Beatrice Croft, a famously sharp-tongued beauty who had long considered the Duke her personal property, was glaring at them with undisguised venom. The dance was a beautiful, terrifying ordeal. She was dancing with the one man she needed to avoid in plain sight of the man she needed to watch. Her simple plan was already unraveling, and the night had only just begun. When the music finally ended, she pulled away as if burned. "Thank you for the dance, Your Grace," she said, her voice formal and dismissive. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "I did not catch your name." She paused, her back to him. "And I did not offer it." Without another word, she melted back into the crowd, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had survived a dance with the Winter Duke, but she had a sinking feeling that she had just exchanged the quiet danger of the shadows for the glaring peril of his spotlight. Eleanor's brief, unwilling turn in the spotlight had changed the atmosphere of the room for her entirely. Before, she had been an anonymous observer. Now she was a subject of intense speculation. As she sought refuge near a colonnade draped in ivy, she could feel the weight of curious glances and hear the sibilant whispers that followed in her wake. Who was she? What had she said to the Duke to hold his attention for an entire waltz? Her primary concern, however, was Lady Beatrice Croft. The woman moved through the ballroom like a shark, her emerald green gown a flash of danger. Her eyes, cold and calculating, were fixed on Eleanor. Beatrice was a woman who did not tolerate rivals, real or imagined. Eleanor knew she had to be careful. A public confrontation with a woman of Beatrice's standing would be catastrophic. Pushing the immediate threat from her mind, she refocused on her original purpose. Lord Davies. He had moved away from the fountain and was now in a less crowded alcove, deep in conversation with two other men. One was a portly gentleman with a florid face, whom Eleanor vaguely recognized as a shipping magnate, Mr. Compton. The other was a younger, nervous-looking man she didn't know. This was her chance. Pretending to admire a nearby tapestry, Eleanor edged closer, using the marble column to shield herself from view. The music and the general din of the ballroom provided excellent cover for eavesdropping. "The contracts are ironclad, I assure you," Davies Mr. Compton was saying, his voice a low, rumbling bass. "The new South American routes are a guaranteed fortune." "Oh, I have no doubt of your business acumen, Compton," Davies replied smoothly. "My only concern is the initial outlay. It's a significant sum to tie up, even for me." "That's where our young friend, Mr. Atherton, comes in," Davies said, clapping the nervous man on the shoulder. "His family has a long and storied history of liquid assets." The young man, Atherton, paled slightly. "My father is very cautious, Lord Davies. He will want to see every detail, every signature." Davies's smile didn't waver, but his eyes grew hard. "Of course. And he will. I have a knack for paperwork. I can make even the most complex arrangements seem appealingly simple. Ask anyone." He laughed, a chilling sound that made the hairs on Eleanor's arms stand on end. It was the same charming, reassuring tone he must have used with her father. He was doing it again, luring another unsuspecting family into his web. "The preliminary signatory documents will be ready by week's end," Davies continued. "Once Atherton's father signs those, the rest is a formality. We'll be celebrating on your new flagship by Christmas, Compton." Signatory documents. Her father had signed dozens of them. It was a detail, a small thread, but it felt significant. Davies's power lay not in brute force, but in the deceptive loop and curl of a signature on a piece of paper. If she could somehow warn Mr. Atherton's father, perhaps she could prevent another family from suffering their fate. But how she had no standing, no credibility. An accusation from the disgraced daughter of Reginald Vance would be laughed out of any drawing room in London. Lost in thought, she failed to notice the rustle of silk behind her until a cloyingly sweet voice dripped into her ear. spying on your betters. It's a terribly unbecoming habit. Eleanor spun around to find Lady Beatrice Croft, standing there, her arms crossed, a malicious smirk on her perfectly painted lips. "I was merely admiring the tapestry," Eleanor said coolly, her heart sinking. "Of course you were." Beatrice sneered her eyes, raking over Eleanor's borrowed gown with open contempt. "You've certainly made a splash tonight, little shadow, catching the eye of the Duke himself. He must be terribly bored. Tell me, what crumbling estate did you crawl out?" "From my affairs are no concern of yours," Eleanor replied, trying to move past her. Beatrice blocked her path. "Oh, but they are. You see, the Duke is my concern, and I don't appreciate interlopers. I don't know who you are or what little game you're playing, but it ends now." The confrontation was drawing attention. People were starting to look their way. This was exactly what Eleanor had feared. She needed to de-escalate, to disappear. "You are mistaken," Lady Beatrice Eleanor said, her voice low and even. "I have no interest in the Duke. I am leaving." "You will leave when I permit it," Beatrice hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. She was enjoying this, enjoying the power she held. She took a step closer, her fan fluttering aggressively. "A woman who arrives without a proper escort, who hides in the corners, and wears a gown that is at least a season out of date. You are a nobody, and nobody makes a fool of Beatrice Croft." Suddenly, Beatrice's hand shot out. It happened so fast, Eleanor had no time to react. Beatrice's fingers, tipped with sharp nails, didn't strike her, but instead hooked into the delicate silver filigree of her mask. With a sharp, vicious tug, she ripped it from Eleanor's face. The satin mask fluttered to the floor like a wounded bird. Time seemed to slow down. The murmur of the ballroom faded to a dull roar in Eleanor's ears. She stood, exposed her face, bare, under the brilliant light of the chandeliers. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers who had gathered to watch the drama unfold. "Well, well," Beatrice said, her voice loud and triumphant. "Look what we have here. It's Eleanor Vance, daughter of the bankrupt Sir Reginald. I thought your family was selling off the furniture to buy bread." The humiliation was a physical force, hot and searing. Laughter, cruel and sharp, pricked at her from all sides. Her identity, her shame, her family's ruin, all laid bare for the entertainment of the ton. Her eyes darted around the room, meeting a sea of scornful mocking and pitying faces. She saw Lord Davies, his eyes wide with shock, and then narrowing with cold, calculating fury. He had recognized her. The threat she posed was no longer anonymous. And then she saw him. Across the room, the Duke of Blackwood stood, watching the entire scene unfold. His face was unreadable, a mask of cold indifference. But their eyes met for a fleeting, heart-stopping second. In that moment, the weight of her failure, the terror of Davies's recognition, and the crushing public disgrace became too much to bear. Her carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. She felt a single hot tear escape her eye and trace a burning path down her cheek. She didn't wait for a second one. Mortified, she turned and fled, pushing her way through the stunned crowd, deaf to the whispers and the laughter that followed her. She had to get out. She had to escape this nightmare. She didn't see the Duke's expression change, didn't see the glacial indifference in his eyes finally crack, replaced by something no one in London had ever seen there before, a flicker of profound, unmistakable shock. He had seen her tear. And for the first time in a decade, the Winter Duke felt something other than ice in his veins. The grand ballroom, with its golden light and soaring music, felt a world away. Eleanor stumbled through a service corridor, the air suddenly cold and smelling of floor polish and wilted flowers. Her lungs burned, and the sound of her own ragged breaths was loud in the sudden quiet. The mocking laughter of the crowd still echoed in her ears, a cruel chorus replaying the moment of her undoing. She was a fool, a naive, hopeful fool, to think she could ever challenge a man like Davies in his own world. She had not only failed to find any leverage, but she had also revealed herself, placing herself, and what was left of her family, in direct danger. Davies knew she was watching him. He was not a man who would tolerate threats, however small. Tears now flowed freely, hot and shameful, blurring her vision. She leaned against the cold plaster wall, her borrowed silk gown feeling like a costume of utter mockery. She had to get home to the relative safety of her crumbling house, to her mother, but the thought of facing her, of admitting this catastrophic failure, was another torment entirely. She pushed open a heavy oak door, expecting it to lead outside to an alley where she could slip away into the anonymity of the London night. Instead, she found herself in a vast, silent library. Rows upon rows of leather-bound books soared towards a ceiling, lost in shadow, the only light coming from the moon filtering through a tall arched window. The room was hushed, sacred. It felt like a tomb for forgotten knowledge. She walked towards the center of the room, her slippers silent on the thick Persian rug. She wrapped her arms around herself, a futile attempt to ward off the chill that had settled deep in her bones. It wasn't just the cold of the room, it was the cold of absolute despair. Her grand gamble had failed, and she had lost everything. She had left her dignity. Running solves nothing, Lady Eleanor. The voice was quiet, yet it resonated through the cavernous room, making her gasp and spin around. The Duke of Blackwood stood in the doorway she had just come through, a tall, dark silhouette against the distant light of the corridor. He closed the door behind him, plunging the room into near darkness, save for the moonlight that now illuminated his imposing form. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling but laced with defiance. "Have you come to enjoy the spectacle up close to gloat?" He moved further into the room, his footsteps as silent as a predator's. Gloat. That is an emotion I find inefficient. He stopped a few feet from her, his face half in shadow, half in the pale moonlight. The coldness was still there, but it was different now. Sharper. More focused. "I came for an explanation. I owe you no explanation." "Your Grace." She shot back, wiping angrily at her tears with the back of her glove. "You do." He countered, his voice dangerously soft. "You appear at the most important social event of the season in disguise. You seek to avoid attention, yet you dance with me. You are eavesdropping on Lord Geoffrey Davies. You are publicly humiliated by Beatrice Croft, yet the man you truly fear is Davies. I saw it in your eyes the moment he recognized you." And then he paused, taking another step closer. "You cry. I have never seen a woman of your class show such a genuine, uncontrolled emotion in public. It is an anomaly, and I do not tolerate anomalies in my world." Eleanor stared at him, stunned into silence by the terrifying accuracy of his observations. He hadn't just seen her. He had analyzed her every move, dissecting her motives with chilling precision. "My family's affairs are private," she finally managed to say, her defenses rising again. "Your family is ruined," he stated, not with cruelty, but with the flat finality of a banker reading a ledger. Sir Reginald Vance. A good man. A terrible investor. He lost everything in the South Seas shipping speculation 2 years ago. A venture championed by his trusted friend and advisor, Lord Geoffrey Davies. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling her secrets, one by one. "How do you know all this?" she whispered, a new kind of fear creeping in. This man's knowledge was as vast as his fortune. "It is my business to know things," he said simply. I am a man who values facts. And the fact is, your presence here tonight, your interest in Davies, your desperation, it all suggests you believe your father was not merely unfortunate, but cheated. Am I wrong? She couldn't speak. He had stripped her bare, not just of her mask, but of all her pretenses. All she could do was stare at him, her tear-streaked face illuminated in the moonlight, her vulnerability complete. The fight went out of her, replaced by a wave of utter exhaustion. He destroyed us, she said, her voice barely a whisper, the confession tasting like ash in her mouth. Davies built a labyrinth of lies and false companies and led my father straight into the heart of it. He praised my father's wisdom while signing the papers that bled him dry. But there is no proof. It's all just gone, hidden in ledgers no one can find, in testimonies no one will give. I came here tonight, thinking, hoping. I don't know what I was hoping for. She finally broke her shoulders, slumping in defeat. The Duke remained silent for a long moment, his stormy grey eyes fixed on her face. The moonlight caught the lingering wetness on her cheeks. He seemed to be looking not at her, but through her, as if her confession had unlocked a door in some dark, forgotten corridor of his own mind. The library was so quiet she could hear the frantic beat of her own heart. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its sharp, analytical edge. It was lower and held a strange, resonant timbre she had never heard before. "You are looking for proof against Geoffrey Davies?" he asked. She nodded numbly. He took a final step, closing the distance between them until he was looming over her. She had to tilt her head back to look at him, her breath catching in her throat. The coldness in his eyes was still there, but now it was burning with a new, terrifying intensity. It was the cold of a banked fire, hiding immense heat beneath the surface. "Then you and I have something in common. Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice a low, dark promise. "Because so am I." The Duke's words hung in the silent library, as shocking and improbable as a clap of thunder from a clear sky. Eleanor stared at him, her mind struggling to process the impossible statement. The Duke of Blackwood, a man who could buy and sell half of London, was hunting the same petty predator she was. It made no sense. She finally breathed the word, full of disbelief. "Why? What could a man like Lord Davies have possibly done to you?" For the first time, a shadow of genuine emotion crossed the Duke's face. It was a fleeting, dark thing, a glimpse into a wound he kept meticulously hidden. He turned away from her and walked towards the moonlit window, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. "My father was not the man I am." He began, his voice flat, devoid of its usual commanding tone. "He was like yours in a way. Trusting. He saw the best in people, even when it was not there. He believed in friendship and honor, above profit and loss." He paused, his gaze fixed on the distant lights of the city. 10 years ago, my family was on the brink of a collapse that would have made your father's ruin look like a minor inconvenience. The Blackwood fortune was built on older, more traditional investments. My father, wanting to modernize, was persuaded to enter into a series of highly speculative colonial ventures. He fell silent, and Eleanor could almost feel the weight of his unspoken words. She held her breath, waiting. The advisor who guided him, who co-signed the loans and structured the deals, was a brilliant young man, new to the city, full of charm and ambition. The Duke continued, his voice hardening with each word. "He presented my father with an opportunity that promised to triple our wealth. Instead, it was a trap. The companies were shells, the assets non-existent. My father was left with catastrophic debt. The man who orchestrated it all vanished, taking with him a significant portion of what was left, leaving my father to face the creditors and the shame. It was Davy's Eleanor whispered the pieces, clicking into place with a horrifying certainty. He called himself Mr. Cole back then, the Duke corrected, turning back to face her. The moonlight cast his features in sharp relief, making him look like a statue carved from ice and fury. But it was him. The methods, the charm, the utter ruthlessness, they are unmistakable. My father. The disgrace broke him. He died less than a year later. I was 20 years old. I inherited a title, a mountain of debt, and a name that was on the verge of becoming a joke. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold room. The stories about him, the ruthlessness, the coldness, the obsession with work, they weren't just character traits. They were armor, forged in the fire of betrayal and grief. He had clawed his way back from the abyss, rebuilding his family's fortune with a single-minded, brutal efficiency, because he had been left with no other choice. His coldness wasn't a choice. It was a scar. I spent the next 10 years rebuilding, he said, his voice regaining its familiar steel. And I spent that time searching. Davies was clever. He changed his name, bought a minor title with his stolen money, and slowly, carefully built a new identity. He only returned to London's high society 3 years ago, believing enough time had passed that no one would connect the flamboyant Lord Davies with the shadowy Mr. Cole. But I never stopped looking. Here in the dark, they were no longer the Winter Duke and the disgraced lady. They were two survivors of the same storm, their families wrecked by the same man. A strange, unexpected bond of shared grievance connected them more potent than any social introduction. I have wealth and power, the Duke said, his eyes boring into hers. I have investigators who have been tracking Davies's every move. But he is slippery. He keeps his official dealings just on the right side of the law. The proof I need, the kind of undeniable evidence that will not only ruin him financially, but see him imprisoned for fraud, remains just out of reach. He has built a fortress of paperwork around himself. My father kept meticulous records. Eleanor found herself saying, her voice stronger now, a flicker of her earlier hope reigniting. He was a baronet, but he had the mind of a clerk. He trusted Davies, but he recorded every meeting, every document he signed, every promise Davies made. The journals are all I have left of his. I've read them 100 times, but I'm not a financier. It's a maze of numbers and terms I don't understand. The Duke became utterly still. The air in the library crackled with a new intensity. Journals, he said, his voice sharp. He kept journals of his dealings with Davies. Yes, she confirmed. Dates, times, specifics of their conversations. He documented everything. Arthur Blackwood crossed the room in 3 long strides, his cold facade completely gone, replaced by the focused intensity of a hunter who has just caught the scent of his prey. He stopped directly in front of her, his presence overwhelming. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice low and urgent, and for the first time he used her name. "You have what I lack, a personal record of his methods, his lies, his patterns. I have what you lack, the resources to understand what that record means, and the power to use it as a weapon. Alone, we are spectators to his crimes. Together, we can become his executioners." It was not a proposal of courtship or charity. It was a declaration of war, and he was inviting her to be his ally. It was a terrifying, exhilarating prospect. To place her trust in this formidable, intimidating man was a risk, but to refuse was to accept defeat, to let Davies continue his reign of destruction. She looked into his stormy grey eyes, and saw not a cold Duke, but a man driven by a righteous fury that mirrored her own. She saw the ghost of the 20-year-old boy who had been forced to become a man of winter to survive. "What are you proposing, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice steady. "I am proposing an alliance," he said. "You will grant me access to your father's journals. My financial experts will analyze them alongside the information I have gathered. We will find the link, the undeniable proof of fraud. In return, I will provide the means to restore your family's name and ensure your financial security. And together, we will see Geoffrey Davies utterly and completely destroyed." He held out his gloved hand. It was not a gesture of a gentleman asking for a dance, but of a general sealing a pact. Eleanor looked at his hand, then back to his face. The choice was clear. Her mother's words came back to her. "You have your pride." She realized now that true pride wasn't about hiding her poverty. It was about fighting for justice. She placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, cool, and strong. It felt like an anchor in the turbulent sea of her life. "I agree, Your Grace," she said. A covenant was made in the silent moonlit library, a covenant of scars sealed by a shared desire for vengeance. And as they stood there hand in hand, the first light of dawn began to creep over the London rooftops, promising a new and far more dangerous day. The days that followed the Harrington Ball were a whirlwind of clandestine activity. The Duke of Blackwood was a man of formidable efficiency. The morning after their meeting, a discreet, unmarked carriage arrived at Eleanor's modest townhouse. The Duke himself did not emerge. Instead, a quiet, grey-haired man named Mr. Finch. His personal solicitor stepped out. He was polite, professional, and asked no questions. Eleanor handed over her father's precious journals, 5 thick, leather-bound volumes, feeling as though she were entrusting him with the last remnants of her family's soul. True to his word, the Duke provided for her family's immediate needs: a delivery of groceries from a fine purveyor, a cord of wood for the fireplace, and a note from a doctor stating that all of Mrs. Vance's medical costs were to be sent to a private account. It was all done with a silent, impersonal precision that left no room for gratitude or obligation. It was simply one side of a business arrangement being fulfilled. Eleanor told her mother that an old friend of her father's had learned of their plight and offered assistance, a lie that brought a wash of relieved colour to her mother's pale cheeks. Eleanor was summoned to the Duke's city residence, a formidable stone mansion in Belgravia, 3 days later. She was led not to a drawing room, but to a vast office that felt more like the command centre of an empire than a personal study. One entire wall was covered in maps, another with bookshelves from floor to ceiling. The Duke sat behind a massive mahogany desk, not with Mr. Finch, but with 2 other severe-looking men. Her father's journals were spread open across the desk, their pages marked with slips of paper. "Lady Eleanor, the Duke," said, rising as she entered. He gestured to the men. "Mr. Hawes, my chief accountant. Mr. Sterling, a specialist in corporate law. They have been examining your father's records. Mr. Hawes, a man with spectacles so thick they magnified his eyes, looked at her with something akin to reverence. Lady Eleanor, your father's penmanship was exemplary, but his true genius was his unintentional documentation of a master criminal at work." For the next 2 hours they walked her through the labyrinth. What had been a confusing jumble of names and figures to her became, in their expert hands, a damning indictment. They showed her how Davies had created a network of interlocking shell corporations, each one designed to fail. He would use the initial investment from a man like her father to secure a massive loan for one company, then funnel that loan into a second company he secretly controlled. The first company would then declare bankruptcy, leaving the investor and the lenders with nothing, while Davies absconded with the liquid capital. He's a ghost, Mr. Sterling explained, tapping a complex diagram he had drawn. He never uses his own name on the final ownership documents. He uses proxies, paid men of low standing. The genius of your father's journals is that he recorded the promises Davies made in person. He wrote, "G.D. assured me today that he is the sole proprietor of the Caraway Trading Post." Legally, Caraway was owned by a drunken dock worker in Liverpool, but your father's journal is a contemporary record of Davies's fraudulent misrepresentation. It's a pattern. The Duke added his voice, a low, cold hum. He has done this at least 4 times, that we can now prove, including to my own father. Your father's journals provide the crucial link, the sworn testimony from beyond the grave that ties Davies directly to the fraud. A cold fire ignited in Eleanor's chest. "So you have him." "We have the arrow, the Duke," said his grey eyes, locking with hers. "Now we just need to find the right moment to fire it." That moment, he explained, was to be a high-stakes meeting of investors Davies was hosting in 2 days. He was attempting to lure in his next victim, the young and naive Mr. Atherton, whose father held one of the largest private fortunes in England. Davies was planning to use the Atherton investment to launch his most audacious scheme, yet one involving fraudulent land grants in the Americas. His greed has made him bold, the Duke said. He will have all his potential partners in one room. He will be at his most confident, his most charming, and that is when we will strike. The plan was audacious. The Duke and his legal team would interrupt the meeting. Mr. Compton, the shipping magnate from the ball who was also being drawn in, had been quietly warned by the Duke and had agreed to cooperate, feigning ignorance until the right moment. They would present the evidence of Davies's long history of fraud. But they will only see it as an attack from a business rival, Eleanor argued. Davies will charm his way out of it. He will call you a predator, trying to sabotage him. That the Duke set a strange light in his eyes is where you come in. Eleanor felt her blood run cold. Me Davies believes you are a ruined, powerless girl, hiding in shame. He does not expect you to ever show your face in society again. Your appearance at that meeting will be a profound shock. You will not be an accuser, but a witness. You will not speak of finance or law. You will simply tell the story of what he did to your father. You will make it personal. You will be the human cost of his ambition. The thought terrified her. To face Davies again, to stand before a room of powerful men and bear her family's deepest wounds. It was unthinkable. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. The Duke stood up and walked around the desk until he was standing before her. He did not touch her, but his proximity was just as potent. "At the ball you wore a mask to hide," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I am asking you now to show your face as a weapon. You told me you wanted justice for your father. Justice is not won in the shadows, Lady Eleanor. It must be seized in the light." She looked into his face, into the eyes that were no longer just cold, but filled with a fierce, unwavering resolve. He was not asking her to be a victim. He was asking her to be a warrior. He was offering her the chance to reclaim the pride and the name that had been stolen from her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but for the first time, it was eclipsed by something else, courage. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Tell me what I have to do," she said. The meeting was held in the oak-panelled boardroom of a private bank in the City of London. The air was thick with the smell of cigar smoke and money. Lord Geoffrey Davies stood at the head of a long, polished table, a map of the Americas spread before him. He was in his element, his voice a smooth, confident purr, as he painted a glorious picture of future profits for the half-dozen men seated around the table. Young Mr. Atherton sat to his right, his eyes wide with awe, completely captivated. Mr. Compton sat opposite his face, a mask of bluff, hearty interest. And so, gentlemen, Davies concluded, tapping a finger on a region marked Atherton Territories. With this final injection of capital, our venture is not just a possibility, but a certainty. A new dynasty of wealth awaits us all. He was holding a pen out to Atherton, gesturing to the preliminary contract on the table. Your signature, my boy, is the key that unlocks the future. At that precise moment, the heavy boardroom doors swung open. Every head in the room turned. Arthur Blackwood, the Duke of Blackwood, stood on the threshold, flanked by his solicitor, Mr. Finch. The Duke's presence sucked the warmth from the room. His face was a thundercloud of controlled fury. Davies, the Duke, said, his voice ringing with cold authority, I believe you are promising these gentlemen a future that you have no intention of delivering. Davies paled for a fraction of a second before his charming mask snapped back into place. Your Grace, an unexpected surprise. To what do we owe the honor? Have you come to invest as well? I'm afraid this is a private consortium. I am here to prevent a crime, the Duke stated, stepping into the room. Mr. Finch began distributing folders to the stunned investors. Gentlemen, what Lord Davies has presented to you is a fantasy. The same fantasy he sold to my father 10 years ago under the name of Mr. Cole. The same fantasy he sold to Sir Reginald Vance 2 years ago. This is outrageous. Davies blustered, his face flushing with anger. Slander and libel. You have no proof. On the contrary, the Duke said calmly, we have a great deal of it. Mr. Compton chose that moment to speak. The land grants you spoke of, Davies, he said, his voice suddenly hard. My sources at the Colonial Office tell me they don't exist. This entire map is a work of fiction. The investors began murmuring their expressions, shifting from confusion to suspicion. Atherton's hand, which had been reaching for the pen, froze. Davies's composure began to crack. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting towards the door. These are the ravings of a competitor. He snarled. He wants the deal for himself. The deal is poison, Davies. And you are the snake who sells it, the Duke retorted. But your testimony is not the only one we have today. He stepped aside, revealing the person who had been standing behind him in the doorway. Eleanor Vance walked into the room. She was not wearing a borrowed ball gown, but a simple, dignified dress of dark grey wool, the most respectable garment she owned. Her hair was pulled back simply, and she wore no jewels. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with a righteous fire. She did not look like a victim. She looked like a reckoning. A collective gasp went through the room. Davies stared at her, as if he had seen a ghost, his mouth falling open. Lady Eleanor the Duke, said his voice, softening, almost imperceptibly. Eleanor walked slowly towards the table, her gaze fixed on Davies. She ignored the other men, their shocked faces, their whispered questions. She stopped directly opposite him, her hands clasped in front of her. Lord Davies, she began, her voice clear and steady, resonating with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Do you remember my father, Sir Reginald Vance? You called him your friend. You sat at our table, you drank his wine, you praised his honor. You told him that the South Seas shipping venture was the opportunity of a lifetime, a way to secure his family's future. She let the words hang in the air. My father was an honorable man. He believed in the goodness of others. He believed in you. He trusted you with everything he had. And you, in return, bled him dry. You watched him sign paper after paper, each one another nail in his coffin. And you smiled. Her voice trembled, but she did not weep. My father died a broken man, Lord Davies. He died of shame. Our home is cold, my mother is ill, and our name is whispered with pity. That is the future you secured for my family. She finally looked at the other men, her gaze sweeping across their faces. Look at this man, she said, her voice rising with power. Look at the charm and the promises. It is all a lie. My father's journals, every word he wrote in his final years, are a testament to that lie. He is not an architect of fortune. He is an architect of ruin. And he will lead you all to the same end. The boardroom was utterly silent. No one dared to move. Eleanor's testimony, raw and heartbreakingly real, had done what no legal document could. It had stripped away Davies's facade and exposed the monster beneath. Davies, finally broken, lunged for the door, but two burly men whom the Duke had stationed outside blocked his path. His reign was over. In the aftermath, as constables arrived and the stunned investors spoke in hushed tones with Mr. Finch, Eleanor stood by the window looking out at the city streets. She felt a profound sense of release, as if a heavy chain had been lifted from her soul. Arthur Blackwood came to stand beside her. For a long moment, they stood in silence, watching the city move on, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I did it for my father," she replied softly. "I know." He turned to her, and in the clear light of day, she saw that the ice in his eyes had finally truly thawed. In its place was a warmth and an admiration that made her heart skip a beat. "Your father would have been proud, Eleanor." He said her name with a sense of familiarity, of rightness. The masks were gone, not just the satin one from the ball, but the ones they had both worn for years. He was no longer the cold, unfeeling winter duke, and she was no longer the disgraced hiding daughter. They were just Arthur and Eleanor, two souls who had found in their shared quest for justice an unexpected and profound connection. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a very long time, it was not dark. It was illuminated by the promise of a new beginning, one they would face together in the clear, unforgiving, and beautiful light of day. And so the fall of a mask in a ballroom led not to an ending, but to a powerful new beginning. It was a story of how one moment of vulnerability, a single tear, could break through years of icy reserve and expose a truth that demanded justice. Eleanor and Arthur, bound by the scars of their past, found the strength to rebuild their futures, not just by punishing the guilty, but by trusting each other. Their journey reminds us that true strength isn't about the walls we build, but about having the courage to let the right person see them crumble. If their story of resilience, courage, and unexpected love resonated with you, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit the like button to let us know you enjoyed it. Share this video with someone who loves a story of justice and romance. And most importantly, subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next tale. Thank you for listening.